mongoosejs.com documentation for a schema. So I just Googled mongoose schema. This is where we're headed, all right? So today what we're going to do is we're going to create our own database, which is going to be basically an in-memory array that allows us to be able to add things to it. And while our server is running, we can continue to create data, read data, update, and delete data. Make sense? When you store something in an object, you can continue to work with it until you stop your server, and then now anything you've stored in that array or that object is obviously going to start back at zero. Right? That's what we're going to do. Think of it like this. You know when you did this kind of thing in like 201 and 301, when you see this at the top of a file, you pretty much automatically know that you're going to put data in that thing. That's kind of like an in-memory database to some degree. It's a persistence layer that's happening while the app is running. We're going to be doing that today, but I want to show you where we're headed tomorrow. So tomorrow we're going to hook up MongoDB, and we're going to start to talk about ORMs, or Object Relational Mappers, and one of those things in particular is called Mongoose. Mongoose is PG. You know the Node PG module that allows you to be able to connect to Postgres?
Yes.
We're going to be using MongoDB as the database, that's like Postgres. And we're going to be using Mongoose as the way to connect to the database, that's like PG. Right? But Mongoose also has the ability for us to create schemas or blueprints. Instead of us creating like a SQL file and then loading that into the database, we can actually do this as part of our application. So if you look at this, right, this should look pretty similar to what you've seen before. Blog schema, which is a model or a blueprint, right? We have title is a string, author is a string, body is a string. Comments can be an array of strings, right? Well, there's actually an array of objects, I should say, which has a body property that's a string and a date property that's a date. Date is going to be, now this is important to look at, date is going to be an object with a type of date and a default of date.now. That means as soon as you, this is pretty cool, as soon as you make something, it like timestamps it. So the idea here is like every time you create a record for anything, it's like timestamped, right? Hidden Boolean meta is an object that has votes and favorites, right, which is numbers. Yes. Yes. So this is nothing more than a basic blueprint for how our data should exist when we start to do CRUD operations against our database, right? When I read from the database for a blog, every blog needs to have a title, author, body, so on and so forth. There are other pieces of this too that we're going to make ours better than this, just to be clear. So for example, where this says title string, tomorrow what we're going to do is not like title string. We're going to say title is a string and required is true. So we're going to add a little bit more of an extra layer to it. Do you remember? You remember in 301 when you created a schema and you said, I need, like weather to have. Actually, we'll make it easy. We'll say you created a schema for a person, and a name needed to be a string, right? And an age needed to be, a number. Basic kind of schema, right? If you tried to make age an object, then all of a sudden Postgres comes back and says, we're sorry, you can't do that, validation error. Meaning that you can't just stuff stuff in a database in any sort of data format that you want. Your database has to be organized and blueprinted or set up in such a way that the data that you save to your database is the type of data you expect to save to it, right? We're moving in the direction of document-based storage. You have been using relational database management systems. So relational data, that means tables. We're about to move into saving our data not through the use of weird table systems, right, which are actually still the most widely used. SQL is the most widely used database language on the internet, right? But we're moving in the direction where a lot of applications are JavaScript based. So you just make an object and you save the object to the database, and when you retrieve things from the database, you get an object back. So for example, when you had to do that client.query thing that was like select star or insert whatever, that probably got kind of annoying every now and then because you might mess up something. You remember those values of like a number and one? That's all really hard to read, right? Tomorrow we are seriously going to get into this. I'm so serious. Var, car is equal to an object, and we'll just say model is Mazda. All right, this is what we're about to do. You would have had to say like insert car into cars table where car blah 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 blah. We're gonna do this tomorrow. Car.save. It saves our car to the database, right? Seriously. If we want to get a car, we're going to say things like car.get by ID, and it's another method name, but this will give you an idea. And then you give it an ID, we'll say like 345, and then all of a sudden we have our car, right? If you want to find one car, you can find one. If you want to find multiple different types of cars, you can. If you want to retrieve records from all kinds of things, there's methods for this. Versus client.query SQL statement, it is get car by ID, get thing, remove item. Like it's basic methods that make sense in the method name. That's where we're going.
You will build this method?
No, this is like these are going to be given to you. We are going to build a couple of our own custom database hooks, which means that they'll do some of these things and a little bit of extra stuff for us. But most of the things that we're going to do, and actually tomorrow in general, we're just going to be using find by ID. That's like the number one Mongoose method there is. That means find an item by its ID. If you have an ID for an item, you pass it a string and you get back the thing you want. To save something to the database is .save, right? And then you could say .then data, which means when I save my data, tell me what I just saved, right? That kind of thing. Does that make sense? So we're moving in a direction of that. What we're doing today, though, is we're going to create our own version of this to help you understand how this works. So today is about the setup for tomorrow so that when you use this tool, you understand why this tool was created the way that it was, and you can kind of modify and work around that if you need to, okay? All right, so this is gonna be a progressively built demo. That means that I am gonna start building, I'm gonna tell you to hold your questions, and we're gonna build, 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 build. We will probably have some time at the end of this to continue to discuss things, but I want to make sure that we get through this in such a way that it's tutorialized in the video. Okay? All right, so the first thing we're going to do here is create, let's go over here actually. We're going to create a scaffold for our application today. All right? And the point of our application is going to be to deal with models. Now what we're going to do is we're going to create a food model, and then we're going to create a collection that can contain different pieces or different types of food. So a collection of models, right, would be, think of it like this. Here is an array of food, right? So we have an apple and a pear and a banana and steak and chicken, whatever, right? Food items, okay? That's what we're doing. Now we're gonna be building our demo around a collection of food and then individual food items. Okay, so food is going to be our model for a type of food, and then we have a collection that will hold those food items. Your lab is categories and products. This represents an e-commerce platform. So collection and food map to categories and products. Make sense? Your lab assignment is very similar to what we're doing today with a different domain. That just means instead of me saying build the exact same thing, you need to build it in such a way where it's products and categories, not food and a collection of food. We follow? All right, and I'll talk about that again when we get into your lab assignment. So the first thing I'm going to do here, pull this up a little bit. All right, I'm going to say ls here. We'll start with make dir. We'll call this food model demo. Right, I'm going to that. And I'm going to go ahead and create the scaffold for our application. Now, I'm going to tell you first and foremost, there will be pieces that are similar in the guide repo, but I'm also not going to give you exactly, or not the guide repo, your course repo. I'm not going to give you exactly what's in there. This is going to be a little bit of a different demo. However, I will push this demo up. Cool? So you will have access to the exact one that I built for you today. All right? First thing we're going to do, again, is scaffold the application. I'm going to touch a collection.js file. We're going to name it this so that you don't get confused with this being like a massive application that has a main entry point like index.js that does all this stuff. We're just going to kind of model out the way that
the way that a collection should exist and the way that models should exist within that. So if you want to name that index, you can, but I want to be clear on what we're doing here. So I'm going to call this collection so you know what it is. Okay. So inside of this, I have a collection.js. This is where we're going to create the collection for all of our food items. I'm going to say make dir model, right? Or actually, I should say models because we're going to have multiple. Models is where we're going to hold all of our models or blueprints for how this stuff works. Okay. Then in addition to that, we're going to create a test folder so that we can test that things work as expected, right? And then I'm going to run npm init-y so that we can create a package JSON for this. Now, in this package JSON file, we have main collection.js. That should just tell you that when you create a file and then you run npm init-y, it will look at that file and go ahead and make it the main point. So when you make an index.js, it will set that up as index.js. When you create a server.js and then run npm init-y, it will set that as the main point. Now we all know what a package JSON file is for, but I'm going to ask someone in this room, as if this was an interview question to you, what is the purpose of the package JSON file? I'm going to go here.
To run all the modules related to the dependencies using by Node.js.
Yes, I'm going to say that that counts mostly. Really what I'm looking for is, and you picked up on the main piece, dependencies and meta information. Remember that there's other like basic information about your application. So the point of a package JSON is to house the names of dependencies and meta information and versions, yes. And the whole idea behind the package JSON file is that when we install dependencies, their names and their versions are there, so that when we push our code up, Node Modules doesn't go with it, and anyone who clones our app can run npm I, it can find those modules, and it can install it. That's the Node ecosystem. That's the whole idea around Node application development. Don't install a bunch of helpful tools and then push those helpful tools up, install all those helpful tools, and then only push your app up, and when other developers need that, those helpful tools are listed here so that they can then install them on their own machines. That's why when you run your code or push your code up as a GitHub action, one of the first actions that happens in there is npm I, so that in order to run your code and your test, it installs all those things on what we call a virtual machine. Okay? So here we have our basic kind of food model. We are going to install a package as part of this, actually a couple packages. We're going to say npm install. We'll start with jest because we know that we're going to be writing test for this application. In addition to that, we're going to pull in Faker, which you've seen just a little bit of. Faker allows us just to be able to get random data. That's its whole point. If we want a random string, if we want a random phone number, a random email, Faker just randomly gives us that information. It is very, very, very useful. The last thing you want to do is just spend your time making fake data to test your app. You want to use a module like this to help you create fake data quickly, right? In fact, we're going to start working next week with something called JSON Server, right? JSON Server is basically just this fake JSON API that just gives you back fake data so that you don't have to make your own JSON files. Does that make sense? So we're going to start working with those kind of tools as well. And then the last one we're going to work with is called UUID. UUID is a way to generate a unique ID, right? A unique hash, a unique string. So that way we can create unique IDs for our users. The idea of thinking about this is that when you were working with SQL, right, and you were putting things in a database, your primary keys, or the way that you pointed to those things, followed this route. It was like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you'd be like, I want to get item 2, and you get item 2. That's not how MongoDB works. MongoDB generates a hash. It generates a long character, a series of characters that are super unique, right? Almost in like a hexadecimal format to some degree, where it's like ID, and it's actually underscore ID, just so you know, in MongoDB. And it'll look something like this. You know, just some long, long thing. That way it's super unique every single time. we're going to use the node UUID module to create a really unique ID instead of us having like ID of 1, ID of 2. We're going to give them unique identifiers. Cool? All right, that's what that module is for. So again, when we look at this, 498 packages were installed from these 3 things here. Okay? That is the prime example of why you don't push node modules up. That would take forever and to push, forever to clone. Cool? The more you, and we just started. We only have 3 modules, right? Okay. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and set up kind of the base model for this. So we're going to start this process by going into models, all right? And inside of our models directory, excuse me, we're going to create a food model, all right? So that is the smaller layer. Now I want to kind of talk about that for a second. When you have an application to build, here's what we're going to have. We're going to have a collection, okay? And we're going to have food. Food lives in collection. So when you're building an application that has resources like food, that have containers like collection, you don't start here. You start here so that you can plug this into here. Okay? So we're going to start with our food model, build that out, so that we can then start to represent a collection of food. Follow? So we're kind of starting at the lowest point. All right? So let's go ahead and actually, I'm going to open it from here. I didn't ask you this yet. I told you I would. Do you all prefer the darker screen or the lighter screen on VS Code? Lighter? Ah, I knew it was going to be a mix. All right, this week I'll keep it lighter. Next week I'll go darker, and the week after that I'll go light. We'll swap, right? And if the videos end up being, they need more, then we can work through that too. What? Thought I opened a folder. Ooh, no. VS Code bug. Yep, this is a great example of VS Code being funky. So I knew it was going to happen the second time. Sometimes when you open VS Code, it will just not open up where you're supposed to be, or it won't open up the thing that you expect it to open, right? Usually what I do in that case, because here I have all these files, I go and I close VS Code, and I quit it, and then I just restart it. Okay, so now code space dot, now it'll open up. See? It's a weird bug. All right, so inside of here, we're going to go into our models. And actually, I haven't created a model file yet. We're going to do that. Sorry, I should have done that. We're going to do that directly in the terminal because we're pros and we're not doing things in VS Code, right? Or at least the creation of files. And I'm going to say touch food.model.js. There's going to be other things in here. We'll make those in a minute, okay? So let's jump over here. Now I have inside of models food.model.js. And I like the convention of like thing.thing to help you realize what this is. So just so you know, as long as you have the file extension of .js, it will be a JavaScript file, right? Good? Okay. So inside of here, we're going to say use strict, as always, right? And then, let me blow it up just a little bit here. We're going to start with, good call. We're going to say const. We'll call this UUID is equal to require UUID. Now, here's what you need to do, /v4. There are different UUID hashing kind of algorithms that will create unique characters for you. Some will be like base64 encoded. I mean, there's all kinds of different things. This is the one that we have chosen to use. And if you go to the UUID documentation, so we just go in here, we say UUID. It shows you as part of this package like what some of those things are. So there's different versions of that. V1 gives you this, right? V3 gives you this.
Is it a version?
It's not a version, it's a type of, well, it is a version, yes, but it's a type of identifier. It changes the actual identifier. So here we have that version. Does that make sense? If you wanted to use one, that's fine too, but we've chosen to go with V4. Cool? Some are a little bit more unique than others in terms of length and in terms of characters and content. So we're going with one that's pretty hard to get the same thing. The idea here is that we wanted to make sure that under no circumstance we accidentally got two of the same IDs. Does that make sense? It is near impossible for us to generate a random ID and then generate another one with that long of a string that's going to be exactly the same. I mean, that's like 1 in 100 million, right? Cool, okay. So now we're going to say const schema, and I'm making this word up. Tomorrow that is going to be an actual thing that we get from Mongoose. Mongoose has a schema name, okay? So we're going to say const schema is equal to an object that represents the type of data that we are going to be working with. Now we're going to start at the most basic layer, all right? We're just simply going to say that these things are required, all right? So we're going to validate that they exist. So we'll say ID required is true, name required is true. Tomorrow that's going to end up being something like name is a string, so type of string, and required is true. Follow? Okay. Then we'll do calories. We'll say required true. All right. Okay. So we have a basic blueprint for the type of data that we're going to be working with. All food items need to have an ID, which we'll use UUID to generate the ID for it. All food items have a name, and all food items have a calorie count. Good? Okay. So now we're going to create a class of food. Now notice that this class of food is going to have a constructor function, right, for every food item that we create. We're going to pass it a record, all right, and we're going to say record dot, and this should get you thinking about it, record.id is equal to UUID. So think about that. Each record represents each food item. Make sense? So every single food item is going to end up being a record that we save to the database. We need to generate, or excuse me, I should say, we need to determine the ID or the unique character for that. Name and calories, we can pass it. The identifier we are creating for it. So for example, when I go into MongoDB and I save a record into the database, I don't tell it what the ID of that is, ever. I never make an ID and pass it into MongoDB. MongoDB adds to everything that I create its own ID, and that is a generated ID from MongoDB. Does that make sense? That's why I'm not going to set this up in such a way to pass it an ID. I'm going to let it create the ID every time we make one. We make a food item, we get a new ID. We make a food item, we get a new ID. Cool? All right. And then below that, we need to check and see, actually, we should go ahead and check some validation on this. Now, you can use your validation module if you want. We're just going to make this pretty simple. And we'll just say is valid data. We'll just return true. So if it is valid, return true. And we're going to use that method directly inside of our constructor. And we're going to say if this dot is valid. Now, I want you to think about this too. That's because we're looking at these required pieces. These are all true, right? If is valid, record, then we're going to return the record. Okay. Otherwise, if it is not, then hold on. What did I do?
Required dot.
If the quotation for if it's not true,
Aha. So I know what's going on here. So I have if this dot is valid record. Now hold on, just let me back this up a second. I want to rewrite this so you can kind of have an idea of what's going on. Often you will be in a position, and I bet all of you do this all the time, where you get some weird like syntax thing and you got to figure out where your brace is at or what you messed up there, right? That happens all of the time. So the best way to do that, I'm going to rewrite this, right? This dot is valid, okay? We're going to pass it a record. What I did before, okay, was I started here like this, right? And I started doing things like this and it was like, wait, hold on, you can't do that. That's because I'm in this if block. So the way to trace this back is to start on the right-hand side and then move to the left, not start at the beginning and move to the end, right? That way you'll just get better with time at that. But now we can open up these blocks, right? And we can say something like return record. Oh, well that's definitely broke. If. So if this is a valid record, go ahead and give me the record back. and this record is going to return true or false. Okay? And then below this, and any record just has to exist. That's basically what this is looking for. And then below this, we're going to say else return. In this case, let's do undefined. All right? And we'll talk about why in a minute. But you could do false too. That would also be a good case. You could also do something like return error. Right? There's plenty of options here in terms of what you do as your kickback. So what we have here is a really simple model. We have a food item that is going to have ID, name, and calories. We've created a constructor so that when we want to create a new food, or excuse me, a class of food with a constructor, so that every single time we instantiate a new food object, it will automatically have an ID property attached to it, and that ID property is going to be a unique number. We clear so far? Now there's other things that aren't happening here. These things are just sitting here for right now. That's okay. We'll talk about why in a minute. Okay? So we're going to go down. Oh, sorry. And, oh, why does that keep happening?
Required is always for validation.
Say it again.
The required part at the constant scheme is always for validation to check if it's there or not.
You're talking about here? Yes. So that is absolutely correct. So required is going to become super important for us. Let me give you an example of something that wouldn't be required. All right. Date is actually one that's not required because we can put default date.now. So every single time you save a record, we don't actually have to put anything in the date field because our date will automatically get created for us. But if you are trying to save, here's an example. You are building a profile or a login form. You've got to have a name or a username. You got to have an email, and you got to have a password, right? If those things don't exist, then do not allow this user to get logged in, right? Does that make sense? Or at least username. That's exactly right. That is what we are doing. CRUD applications are form applications. They are apps that take data from a form and save that information to the database or retrieve that information from the database. That's what we're doing. Day 8 of Code 201 was forms and events. That is the day that you started learning about how the internet works. Everything is based off of a form, user input that is captured, that then is saved to the database and retrieved on demand. Okay? So we're saying here, for every food item, it's got to have a name, it's got to have a calorie count, it's got to have an ID, right? If we did date and we did something like date.now, that would be a good example of a default thing. And you'll see that tomorrow, okay? So we'll save this file, but it's not at this current point in time actually testable. It can't be utilized in such a way that in another file I can instantiate a new food object. I can't really do much with this file other than be in this file. Who can tell me what I need to do? Yep. We need to export it, right? We need to export the object. So we're going to say module.exports food. Okay? That takes this class and it allows this class to be exportable. Okay? So we'll save this and we're going to back up a sec here. We're now going to jump for just a second from this food model, okay, into another file called our collection file so that we can represent a collection of food. Everybody follow? And then we're even going to pull that into another thing in a minute, all right, which means that food extends collection. So you'll see what this looks like in just a sec. Let's jump into our collection.js file, all right? And in our collection.js file, we're going to build out a series of CRUD operations that allow us to be able to do things for each item within our collection of food. We should be able to get the ID of an item, we should be able to get food by its ID. We should be able to create a new food item, given we have a record or an object that we can save, right? We should be able to update that. So let's say we put pizza had 4 calories and we wanted to change that to 400 calories or whatever, right? And then at the same time, you should be able to say, this food item I no longer want in my list of things that I want to eat. I want to delete this food item. So we are building out this, it's not necessarily a model at this degree, but we're building out this series of CRUD operations that can integrate and work with each food item. Cool? Collection of food. Every single food item can be made, can be deleted, can be seen, So create, read, update, delete. Good? Do you see how this class is now progressing in differently than before? We're not just doing like a callback demo and a promise demo. This is what we will do every single day moving forward. We will be building an app like this, and they will grow, and they will have more things integrated, and they will have more things plugged up into them, and they will start to be deployed every single time we build it. Cool? All right. So inside of collection, we'll start with use strict. Right? We are going to, and just so you know, we'll take a break at 10:50 on the dot. Cool? All right. We're going to say const UUID is equal to require UUID v4. Absolutely. I'm going to go there just so we don't get too. Can everybody see that okay?
Yeah.
Good. Okay. So we'll say class collection. All right. Which means that we're going to create a collection class. That means we can instantiate new collections. Right. And we're going to say constructor is going to accept a model. Now, model is uppercase, all right? Which means that we can instantiate models because it's representing a constructor or a class, all right? You'll see how this connects together shortly. I just want you to be thinking about the conventions of the capital letter that you see there, okay? So we'll say this dot database is equal to an array, all right? Then we're going to say this dot model is equal to model, meaning when we instantiate that new model object, oh, spelled that wrong. No, I did it right. Model, yeah, okay. That word looks weird to me. We are able to house that model, so every food item, as part of this collection of data. When you see database here, it's an array, because ultimately when we spin up our server and we start adding items to this thing, or not our server, we spin up our app, we start adding items to this thing, those items are going to be housed in that array. Again, think back to code 201. var data equals empty array. We do all this stuff. We start pushing stuff up into that array, and then we use that array to loop over and then print out stuff in our table for salmon cookies, right?
Should be array of objects.
Array of objects. Yep, that's exactly right. Okay, and that's actually important to note too, because when you say in Mongo, or through the use of Mongoose, which is like PG, when you say .find by ID, you get back an object because you're looking for an individual thing. When you say .find on a specific collection, right, so a collection of food, then you're going to get back an array of objects. It's going to give you every single item that exists inside of that specific collection. Does that make sense? So Mongoose makes this super easy for us. .find says, give me all the stuff in this collection. That's a table, right? .find by ID says, give me the one thing. Those are really great methods. .save says, save this to the database. No more SQL statements, just JavaScript methods. Cool? All right. So then below this, we're going to do, and I'm going to build out just the basic scaffold for this to get you thinking about it. We're going to do get an item by its ID. Okay? We are going to do create an item given a record. Right? So whatever that item is. So already we are talking about read is get. All right? Create is create. Right? Update is update. So we need to update an item. Now this is important to think about. We need to update the item by ID, and then we give it a record which says here's the stuff to apply to that so that you can update it, right? And then below, we're going to do one more, which is delete. Delete only needs an ID, right? That's all we need for that. Now below this, just because we're scaffolding and we've already had this conversation before, we know that this needs to be exportable. So we're going to say module.exports is equal to collection. I also want to say it again.
We need to require the record.
So we're saying here we need to require the record, not yet, and we'll talk about why. All right, give me a minute, because we don't need to put these two together just yet, because what we're going to do is we're going to create another model that combines these two things together, and you'll see how that looks very shortly. Okay. However, I want to give you just a heads up. I will accidentally, and you can ask me to clarify if you need to, I will accidentally call module model and model module because they're so close in words. So please, if I say that wrong, say, hey Brian, did you mean module or did you mean model? Cool? if you hear me do that. I accidentally do that often. Okay, so get ID. This is the first one we're going to do. All right, so we're going to start this by writing a really abstract piece of code that's using the ternary operator because it makes sense. You saw the ternary operator earlier this week, which was this. Right? And what this says is do this thing, and if it evaluates to true, I want you to go here. Otherwise, I want you to go here. Okay, that's the syntax. Evaluate, oh, true, give me this. Oh, it's not true, give me that. Cool? It is not a replacement for if-else, but it is very good at handling something like a Boolean return and then being able to say yes or no. Okay? It's excellent for one-liners. And I'm going to show you a great one-liner effect with this. So we're going to say let response equal, because we're getting something, so the response of what we get back. Okay? This dot database is a what? What type of data? It's an array, which means that we can work with array methods on it. We're getting back all of our items from our database, and we want to find a specific record, right? So we're going to say dot filter so that we can find a record, all right? And then, make it a little bit smaller. I will blow this up again in just a sec. So we're going to get a record, and I want to ask a question about this again in a second. Get back any record by record ID, okay? If that is equal to the ID that we have passed that thing, okay? If that happens, then if that evaluates to true, then we can render, or at least read this dot database. Otherwise, we're in a position. Oh, sorry, I wrote that wrong. My bad. Always do that. Question mark is somewhere else in here, right? Because we needed to do this first. Let response, if we already have the ID, we got it. Otherwise, we need to go into our database and we need to look. That's where our problem exists. Yep. Then we can say this dot database. Otherwise, right? We are going to return promise. Promise.resolve, because we're going to use a promise structure our response. Now I want to talk through this. All right. This is a really interesting piece of code. It's going to get weird looking if I word wrap this, because there's so much in that line, but I'm going to word wrap it so you can see it. Can you see this? Is that too small? All right, let's do this. I've done this I've done it like 20 times. I always do Command Z for some reason. All right, everybody, here we go. Ready? Let's read through this piece by piece by piece. So let response equal. Now all we have is we have a variable that is going to be assigned, or is going to get a value of whatever the result of this is. Okay? So this is saying whether or not this evaluates to true or false, change the value of this variable. All right? So ID. If ID is true, then we're going to go ahead and go through our entire database, and we're going to grab the specific item that we want. If it is not, meaning we don't have one, then we can just get back the database, which is the whole thing, which is going to be an empty array, or whatever else we've stuffed into it. Got it? Then we have return promise.resolve response. This is where I want you to be thinking about this. Yesterday we used the new promise constructor to be able to create a new promise on our own. We made our own version of a promise, right? This is saying resolve this as a promise, which means that it can be handled with a .then block. Does that make sense? Yeah. So when we call get ID, or get with an ID in it, we can chain .then so that we're able to get the value or the result out of that. And if you've noticed, we're passing in response, so that's either going to be our database, or that's going to be the item that we have asked to retrieve from it. Does that make sense? Okay. So the next thing we want to do is create a record. Now create is going to be a little bit more interesting. Okay? Oh. Let's say let item, digging it. Actually, I have to stop for half a second. When things like this happen, I have to have random conversations because, I'm a person just like you are. One of the things I want to do while I'm in Jordan, so I want anybody to do this for me if you can. I told you before, I'm obsessed with music. It is my entire life. It is what I do when I'm not developing. I want to get immersed a little bit in the music and the culture of Jordan. So hook me up. Please hook me up. Cool? All right.
You got it.
Those kinds of things change my life, so please do that for me. All right. Thank you. Back on track. So we're going to say let item equal new this dot model. All right. So it's this because we assigned it. So this dot model with our record. Now let's think about that. Here we have constructor with model. Model has a capital letter, which means that it's a constructor function. We assign that to this, right, which is a lowercase model. So we can actually just say this dot model to instantiate a new model object with a specific record. All right. We'll explore that again in just a second. So the next thing I want to do is I basically want to say if there is an item, all right, which means that we have this item attached to this model here, okay? So if there is an item, then we want to basically push that item to the database. Database is an array. So we can say this dot database dot push, and we push our item. And if that worked, because we want to handle this method as a promise, we can say return promise.resolve. Seriously. Promise.resolve item. Okay? Otherwise, we have a problem. Now, I want you to be thinking about that in relation to this. We did not do anything other than resolve this. Okay? But we did that because we're either going to get back a database that's empty or we're going to get back the record we want. Okay? So here, we want to actually catch if we try to create this and for some reason we can't create because there wasn't an item added or there was some sort of mistake with our item, then we need to handle it in a catch block. So that means that we need to do something along the lines of else, right? And then we can say something like return promise.reject, invalid item or record. Does that make sense? Okay. So now we're at a place where we've created create. We're going to take a break. Yes, I'm going to say take a break, 10 minutes, and I'll let you ask. Cool?
Because of push method array.
Yep.
Isn't change the original array that make a problem for us?
That's an excellent question. So it does change the original array, right? Like what's happening is every single time we add a record to this, it is going to push it to the end of the end of the list, right? But that's what we want. We want our array to over time collect, right? That's why we call this collection. Collect data. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
This is how I want you to see this in relation to your lab. So this is, we'll just put a comment. Collection is categories, right? And then food is going to be product. Does that make sense? So you have a bunch of products like t-shirts, or actually I should say you have a bunch of Nike t-shirts that exist as a bunch of t-shirts, okay? Think about this for a second. I brought up words like Shopify and Magento earlier. I should have brought up a better word for this. There is the #1 e-commerce retailer in the entire world is Amazon, right? You are not building a feature for Amazon. You are building a lightweight version of Amazon. Crazy, right? Amazon.com allows you to search for products with specific categories, and then you can pick a product and you can buy the product. You are building the framework for that. Cool? It's cool. It's like really, really cool. When you are done with this class, if I've had people ask me this, what will I be able to build? I mean this when I tell you this. When you are finished with this class, if you understand the core concepts of this class, you can absolutely build Facebook. You can absolutely build Instagram. You can absolutely build Twitter. You can build any of those things you want. Are you going to build them to the degree that Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter are built to? No way. There's like thousands and thousands of developers working on the features every day of the week. But could you build a version of it that says, I want to post things, and I want people to be able to read my posts, and I want to be able to have friends, and I want to be able to chat with those friends? Yeah, give yourself a month, and you can build that. We have had people build clones of these things. In fact, we used to build in 401 JavaScript something called CFgram, which is CodeFellowsGram or Instagram. And it was, we could upload profile photos, We could have individual logins. We could have friends that would allow us to be able to see all of the stuff that we post, those kind of things. We are going to be doing something very similar to that in this class too. We will build a full CRUD application that has all this stuff hooked up. You can sign in, log up, add friends, chat with friends, all that kind of stuff. We're going to build a chat server in this class using Socket.io that you could integrate into an app for real-time chat. Meaning like, when you go to a store or a website online sometimes and it's like, live chat, ask us questions, those kind of things, we're going to build that, right? That's where we're going. I know, it's exciting. All right, so it's 10:53. You have until